And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at coalition_radio. Typically this evening, we would be broadcasting RAMP, Real Access Motivates Progress. Tina Peterson is winning an award tonight, so she's at an award ceremony. So we had an opportunity with an open schedule to address a situation that is central to the mission of the Coalition Radio Network, and that, of course, is the reform of the criminal justice system. Full disclosure, the folks that I'm having on the air tonight, I have spent a lot of time with at a variety of meetings. I've been a guest at meetings of something called the High Side Coalition, as well as a variety of criminal justice reform related functions. Folks who follow the coalition know that we wish to end the practice that's somewhat euphemistically, and I always say George Carlin would have a field day in Rhode Island, called segregation. Segregation has nothing to do with racial politics. Segregation has nothing to do with economic strata. Segregation is the government speak term for solitary confinement. It is a contention of the Coalition Radio Network that the state of Rhode Island is engaged in state-sponsored torture. What do we mean by that? Taking people from the, if you will, who are incarcerated, at a variety of levels, I might add, and willy-nilly, at their own discretion, put people into a tiny cage often for unknown, and I use the coalition air quotes, indiscretions, and subject them to what we consider under the United States Constitution to be cruel and unusual punishment. Tonight we've got someone here who's got lived experience, and this week he and his attorney announced a lawsuit against, and it's a civil suit, against a number of individuals who are intimately involved in the day-to-day operations of the Rhode Island Department of Corrections at the Adult Correctional Institute in Cranston, Rhode Island. We consider their behavior to be inhuman, and we consider, again, I'll use the word torture. Torture is occurring right here in the state of Rhode Island, just minutes away. And it is our intent to do everything we can to publicize, to amplify, and give light to individuals who've been impacted by this torture, and at the same time expose the people who have, again, somehow whitewashed their behavior and consider it, well, just part of their institutional experience. Joining me tonight is Mr. Joseph Shepard. I refer to him as Joe. He is now a paroled former medium security inmate at the Adult Correctional Institute. He is the plaintiff in this lawsuit, and we will go into considerable detail, but essentially he spent 8 months in solitary confinement for a violation that we're not even sure is a violation, or essentially an administrative issue that's really, and again, I'm whitewashing at this time, simply for engaging in protected speech, his First Amendment rights, which do not go away if you happen to be incarcerated, and subjected to, again, an atrocious level of cruel and unusual punishment. Also joining me is Natalia Friedlander, who is an attorney of a highly skilled attorney, someone that I consider really a hero in Rhode Island, and she is most closely affiliated with the Center for Justice. Mr. Shepard, Ms. Friedlander, thank you for joining us tonight. I know this is a difficult conversation to have. I applaud both of you, Mr. Shepard, for you having the courage to engage in it, and Ms. Friedlander for your consistent work on behalf of the marginalized and folks adversely impacted by what the coalition considers a brutal, out of control, inhumane criminal justice system. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Pat, thanks so much for having us and for shining light on these issues, which are so often hidden from sight because they happen behind closed walls in Cranston, where very few people are allowed to go who aren't actually incarcerated. So thank you so much for your bringing so much attention to this issue.
Natalia, if I could just start out with just a simple premise here. We talk about these issues not being brought to the public's eye. How much of that is a result of this just sort of generic viewpoint of correctional facilities as a place where people who are not worthy, if you will, of personal freedom at any level, need to be warehoused and often forgotten?
I think that's a better question for Joe, since he was in there and he experienced that level of isolation.
Joe, what say you? What are your thoughts on the matter?
So I was kind of having a hard time hearing that last question. It was going in and out for me, my connection.
Sure, no worries. So, I'll tell you what, let's start from the beginning. Joe, if you could tell us sort of a little bit about your life, what your story is, sort of your backstory, how you arrived at the ACI, and let's just sort of set the framework as well as the conditions at the ACI.
Well, I'm from Providence, Rhode Island. Again, my name is Joseph Shepard, but I'm from Providence, Rhode Island, specifically Manton Projects. Grew up, raised there. It's unfortunately common circumstances, environment full of broken households, drug-addicted parents, or drug-addicted siblings in general. So I've already kind of been put through traumas that have caused somewhat deep scars when it comes to mental health, PTSD, anxiety, depression, things like that. Well, those things exactly. At 15, I was shot multiple times in my back. Unknown reasons, and I don't know, who the culprit was or anything like that, but just because that's what's normal in that environment. So that way of living kind of forces you to be stuck in survival mode, whether you like it or not. You're kind of not really worried about what you enjoy to do. It's kind of what you have to do in order to make it to the next day. So right there, and that's not just me, that's everyone in that environment. Probably all have undiagnosed PTSD in low-income housing environments by the time we leave middle school. So everyone around's on edge, everyone's in survival mode, and this is the environment where most of the people that are incarcerated come from, who suffer with severe forms of mental health issues that go untreated, like mine, untreated in the community, and then it leads to mistreatment once you're falsely or once you're placed in the correctional institution. And then while you're in the correctional institution, you're further dehumanized, you're further misplaced, you're further mistreated, and whatever issues you might have came to prison with are further neglected and oftentimes exacerbated because of the circumstances, policies, and just the conditions of confinement in general at the ACI.
What brought you to the ACI? What were you convicted of? Just give us a little background, if you could, of the criminal charges.
Felony assault with a motor vehicle. A felony assault with a motor vehicle. I was given 20 years with 13 to serve. I was 21 years old. I did 6 years and 9 months of that 13-year sentence. It was an altercation with people from where I'm from, Manton Projects, and people from Hartford Projects. Again, unknown reasons. It just another ripple effect of everyone in these environments being stuck in survival mode 24/7, always on edge, always looking over their shoulder, and one thing led to another, and I was charged with a felony assault with a motor vehicle at the end of it all.
So you're serving time at the ACI. You're in medium security. So you're not in supermax. You're not in the highest level of security.
At that time, I was in medium security, yes.
Talk to us about the conditions, just the day-to-day living conditions there, both before and then during, if you will, the beginning of the pandemic while you were still there.
So before, it's so hard to put in words because as a human being, you kind of know that something's not right. Like you just gotta deal with it, but you're so like dehumanized, and you're not referred to as a human being. You're not even referred to as a number. Like your ID numbers verify when you go to counselors and visits and sign up for programs and stuff, but you're not even referred to as a number. You're referred to the typical language of anyone that works at the prison, the typical language that they use to get the attention of the common inmate or convict is piece of shit, asshole, things of that nature. Custy, crackhead, junkie, lowlife. So them are the day-to-day, that's the day-to-day way that you're referred to.
Mm-hmm.
And then the activities, would you like me to keep going?
No, it's a quick question. And so you're referred to that both by the correctional officers as well as, if you will, management of the correctional officers. I mean, what type of, when you see senior officials or when you see, management of the correctional officers, do they refer to you in the same way? Do they ever speak to you?
They
Do
don't
ever
even,
speak at you?
you're like, you're not even worthy enough to speak to them. It's how the Administrative Act. The most they're gonna get out of them. You're not only referred to in that type of name calling by COs, you're also referred to like that by nurses as well, the medical staff. So they've made it a common practice. It's just a regular thing. And the higher ups, the administrators, the wardens, deputy wardens, they know that that's what's going on, but they'll never let you tell them that. They'll never confirm it when you go to approach them on what's being said to you or how you're being dehumanized. They'll never confirm that they know that. They'll tell you, well, either get out their face, or they have a CO next to them that'll tell you that you can't talk to them right now, or they'll tell you file a grievance or write them a letter, and 9 out of 10 times you will get 0 responses, and the one time that you do, it will be completely irrelevant to whatever that you have like mentioned or brought up, whether it be the conditions of confinement or misconduct with a CO, is never really taken care of properly. You're going to be taken care of further in their eyes.
And I want you to hold that thought for a second, because that's ultimately, when we come full circle in this conversation, it was your attempt to reach out and point out issues in the conditions that you were forced to live in that started this whole circle of violence with you ending up in segregation. And that's a critical point. Attorney Friedlander, if you could jump in for a second. Is there any loss of civil liberties, if you will, when one is incarcerated? And I'm talking about the big stuff, the First Amendment, the prevention against cruel and unusual punishment, issues like that. Do you give that up?
You give up a lot of rights when you're incarcerated, unfortunately, and there's a lot of bad law that's created by the Supreme Court in the 80s and 90s that people are still living with now. And there's a seminal case from 1987 called Turner v. Sapley, which said your constitutional rights, even the most fundamental ones, like First Amendment, Fifth Amendment, they can be abridged when you're incarcerated with limits. And that's one of the assertions in our complaint, is that yes, your First Amendment rights are limited when you are incarcerated, but they do extend to what Joe was doing. You do retain some limited rights to free speech. You retain some limited rights to free association. But unfortunately, since the 80s and 90s, a series of really bad Supreme Court decisions severely limited your civil liberties in prison.
So we arrive at a point where he's been incarcerated. How long had he been incarcerated when he started to engage in a communication, a series of written complaints to management and to, in this case, some outside organizations to seek help?
So that was about 5 years, right?
What that I had in
Yeah, that you,
up
you
until
Yeah,
this incident.
when you started putting the packet together.
Yeah, up until this incident. Yeah, it was about 5 years. But I had
yeah,
always been one to try to go about it with grievances and letters and stuff like that. Simple things like hot water, showers, recreation. So
And you'd also filed a couple of prior lawsuits, at least one of which you settled, right?
yes.
Yeah.
if you could tell us a
So
little bit about that.
one was settled because it was again an intake. I was strip searched and forced to undergo what I would consider sexual harassment by the CO Jarvis, who I had filed a complaint against for his misconduct during a strip search, a random strip search, one out of spite that wasn't okayed by any lieutenant or brass at all. And when I had said something about the way he was conducting the strip search, they tried well not they tried they did they tried to they pressed the code blue on me, which meant that there was a fight going on, like an assault. The CO pressed the code blue on me. I was handcuffed. I was thrown to the floor in just underwear and stretched, limb this way, limb that way, and brought to segregation. I was given 90 days in segregation or solitary confinement and intake, where I had appealed 2 of the 30-day bookings, which they gave me 90 days, and 2 of the 30 days sentence, 60 days worth of the seg time was the exact same booking. And the lieutenant and everyone I had spoken to just gave me 90 days. It took me right into a warden and deputy warden to get the booking dismissed. And because of those bookings, I was also downgraded to a lower security, which I couldn't fix because by the time I had seen classification, I hadn't had that set that the 90 days thrown out yet. I still caught 30 days, but because I had 90 days, I was downgraded from by the classification board from intake to medium security instead of going back to minimum security. So while I was there, I was mistreated. The bookings were fabricated. The tape that I requested to record when I mentioned the sexual harassment to the lieutenant disappeared, and they ended up settling the case in about 9 months for $2,000, and that was just something that it wasn't really obviously anyone on earth can use whatever comes financially, but it wasn't about that more than it was just to get the attention of whoever I could, the courts, the judges, to let them know that this is happening to everyone on a regular basis. But I just happen to be the one to say something about it and have the knowledge to put it through the court system with the help of a few individuals in the law library. And
Now,
then
this is in a sense a perfect point that illustrates the chaos of the entire system. Natalia, is there, from your experience in not just the ACI, but from what you've read about other states or large cities, is 90 days in segregation, solitary confinement, is that typical for engaging in a fight in prison?
I'm not sure about other states and what other states' policies say. The we don't think that solitary confinement should ever be used. Extended solitary
Right.
confinement is defined by the Mandela rules as 15 days or more. And at that point, under the United Nations Convention on Torture, is considered to be torture. So we don't think that solitary confinement, extended solitary confinement, should ever take place. To the extent that prison officials say it's a necessary tool for managing prisoners, for ensuring security. The minute that a security threat is over, someone should be returned to the least restrictive setting that they could properly be housed in. And so the minute that someone is no longer actively being a threat to other people, the correctional best practices say they should be moved back down to be with other people, that there's no reason to keep someone isolated as a punitive measure, that it should only ever be used as a immediate tool for maintaining security and safety. And once security and safety can be maintained in other less restrictive ways, the person should be let out of segregation.
And my question was more motivated by the notion that there seems to be a pattern here of rules and punishments sort of just being made up as folks go along. That there is no real, I mean, is there anything like sentencing standards? And I forgive me, because again, I'm not an expert, but is there anything like sentencing standards for internal behavior while you're incarcerated?
I see what you mean. So there are no empirical evidence-based guidelines that say 90 days is what you should give someone who's engaged in a fight to deter misbehavior in the future, right? In fact, there's a lot of evidence showing that solitary confinement does not prevent violence. It increases violence in prisons. And so one of the things that Joe was writing about in his packet is this reliance on these unpromulgated rules, is this reliance on these policies that didn't seem to have any kind of rational basis to prison needs, but that were being applied against people anyway.
Right. Joe, if you can give us a snapshot of what it's like in solitary. I mean, I'm talking about the style of cell, the food, the hygiene, the safety issues, and also if you could put into your own words, because I've had the opportunity to hear you speak, and you can be pretty provocative, and that in a highly positive way. Give us a sense, if you can, of what happens when you're in solitary.
Well, you lose yourself a little bit every day. And I say that meaning that you lose the sense that you're a human more and more as the days go by. And that's why there's proof that violence is increased, because you don't know, there's blurred lines now. Mentally, there's blurred lines. The best way to describe it to people that have never been to prison or have never seen solitary confinement or a jail cell in general is to basically go to your walk-in closet, if you have one, lock the door, put a hole in the door, then you would get fed through that hole 3 times a day. You're lucky if you got a window that you can see out of, or a window that doesn't have a filming over it that would like prevent you knowing the time of day it is. In medium security, they got that all on the segregation windows. It's like some type of film where you're not sure if it's like big lights, the lights right outside the window, or if it's daytime. It don't really change. So you basically are in a walk-in closet, getting fed through a hole in the door 3 times a day. Once a week, you're giving cleaning supplies, mops, brooms, and stuff like that have just been used by everyone else in the block. That's put through that same hole that you get your food through. They put that right through there. Drippy mop water, dusty broomsticks, put that right through there, allow you to clean up for a certain amount. Then you got to put that stuff right back through that hole that you eat from. That they put your apples on, they rest your apples on there. If you do get any fruit or anything outside of a tray, They rest all that on that dirty slop that they put through your food. So you got to cringe every time you see a food come in. Sometimes it makes you not even want it, but the portions are so small for any human being, a child even, that you basically have no choice but to eat what you're given. If you don't take what you're given, then you're going to be in pain, stomach pains, back pains, whatever else. That's the view. That's the physical look of what's going on. Mentally, you're again losing yourself as the days go by. Whatever trauma you've had in the past comes at random. You have random panic attacks. If you never had a panic attack, I can almost bet that you're going to have one within a 30-day period of being in solitary confinement. And because of your circumstances and because of how stigmatized you are as being incarcerated, a convict, a criminal, or whatever you're in there for, not only by COs and nurses, but by the world in general, you ain't getting no shout outs or calls to anyone because you're having a panic attack. You're going to have to be strong enough most of the time to deal with that yourself and reel yourself in, which is a hard thing to do. I don't know if you've ever had a panic attack, but imagine having a panic attack in your walk-in closet and you can't get to no one, or there's no one there to help you and you just got to stay there dealing with it. But mentally, that makes everything worse. Your physical health, which I have health issues from being shot, definitely are not, especially in segregation. In the ACI as a whole, but in segregation especially, your medical needs are not even viewed as being something of interest to no one, to the wardens, deputy wardens, to medical staff, to doctors. As long as you're not like dead or have like a serious, like
Right.
you're not bleeding out all over the place, most likely you got to write a slip. You got to put the slip in, hoping that it gets to the nurse or to the doctor. And then you got to wait for them to get to you. And this could take, you could probably be out of segregation most of the time before you even get a response. So your physical, your mental, your spiritual all become depleted, especially from being in solitary confinement. They all become depleted by being placed in prison in general, but solitary confinement specifically, whatever you think the worst is that you can go through, solitary confinement speeds it up 10 times, 100 times, and it's not a pretty picture. You go one or two ways. You either lose your mind completely or you try to deal with yourself and who you are and hold on to the little bit of you got left in order to get through it.
You spoke about some of the both the medical issues as well as PTSD amongst other traumas that you were dealing with. During that 90-day period, did you have any access to any level of clinical help, both for your physical as well as your internal wounds? I
tried, but because of how I'm viewed by, you see, we're all, to lay the foundation, we're all human beings. Sometimes human beings are easily provoked, especially when you're dealing with a population that's completely stigmatized by a majority of not only the country, but the world. So you have this clinical staff that works with COs on a day-to-day basis, lieutenants, wardens, deputy wardens, conversates with them about them, their families, eats lunch with them sometimes, maybe even goes to events and work gatherings outside of prison. They build relationships, naturally being humans. Mm-hmm. And that is used against you negatively in the ACI being an inmate, because it's whatever the warden or the lieutenant says, that's what goes. So when I requested clinical help, the lieutenants would have private conversations not too far from my door, telling them, talking to them. I don't know what they were saying, but I know that what happened when I brought up my traumas, the only thing that happened is they came to the crack of my door, They told me to come to the door. They asked me what's wrong. I explained what was wrong. Now, mind you, I have HIPAA rights as well. And they're speaking about my mental health in front of COs who are not trained or do not or shouldn't have access to my mental health records because of HIPAA. And also, the other inmates that are in the cell block are now being entertained because they hear what's going on. So they go to the crack of the door and they're listening to her and me explain my mental health issues. And the only thing that was repeated to me numerous times was, Mr. Shepard, do you want to hurt yourself or others? And every time I said no and went back to explaining my issues, they repeated the same question. Mr. Shepard, do you want to hurt yourself or hurt others? And that was an attempt to find a justification to keep me detained in solitary confinement longer because they no longer had a legit reason to keep me in segregation. So if I would have confirmed what they was asking me, or if I would have acted irrationally and maybe got frustrated by what they were doing, and I started maybe banging on my door or raising my voice or swearing, which is common, but I didn't do that. So when I didn't do that, they walked away and that was it. I was never heard from, I never heard from them again. When I wrote them slips, I didn't give them the justification to keep me segregated. They never returned any of my slips ever again.
Natalia, if he had just said, just out of frustration or one day just out of anger or just even just out of confusion, if he had said that he wanted to hurt other people, what do you suppose they would have done to him at that point in time if he had broken down and just simply uttered those words?
If he had said, I want to hurt other people, he very likely would have been booked. We had, and this individual consented to us sharing his story. We had a client at the High Security Center about a month ago. He was trying to get the attention of a mental health social worker. The mental health social worker said, look, unless you say that you're going to hurt yourself for other people, you have to put in a slip. You have to wait. And he said, look, you're really telling me that I have to threaten to, hurt someone else. And he was booked and given extra time in solitary confinement for making a threat, because they interpreted that statement as making a threat against other people, by saying, look, what do I have to do? Say that I'm going to hurt someone? And that was a moment of frustration. And he was booked and he was given extra days in segregation. And all he was trying to do was get mental health treatment.
Any idea of
that's a very common complaint that we hear.
Right. Any idea, just at a top side, just a general ballpark, how many mental health professionals work at the ACI versus how many inmates there are at a given time, roughly?
So they published numbers about 3-4 years ago, when the legislature had its solitary confinement commission. And at that point, there was one social worker serving all of high security and maximum security. So the two most restrictive facilities, they had one social worker. I'm not sure how many they have now, but it's a very common complaint that we hear from people who try to access mental health treatment, that there just simply aren't enough folks there who are able to give people care. And that's one of the reasons why Joe was saying why they do these very quick cell site visits just to check up. Are you in acute crisis? Are you in acute crisis? Are you in acute crisis? Rather than spending time with people to try to talk with them and help them through what's an extremely traumatic situation.
Now, this was, of course, an exhaustive project done, I believe, at that point in time, Mr. Regenberg, as well as other folks, spent quite a bit of time analyzing solitary confinement. And I bring that up because very often you hear about these study commissions that, are roads to nowhere, the bridge to nowhere, a glorified opportunity for folks to sit around and chat and blue sky things. But it's my understanding that the report issued by Mr. Regenberg and others was quite exhaustive, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. I mean, they had something like a dozen sessions over the course of almost a year, hearing from DOC officials, advocates, researchers, experts in all kinds of fields.
And you know, what became of that?
So the DOC did implement some reforms, and among the reforms that they implemented was the creation of the transitional confinement status, and that's a status that Joe was placed in that he can talk about. That was meant to be a step down from solitary confinement or restrictive housing that they call. And Joe, you could probably mention whether your experience in there, you experienced that as restrictive housing or not. But that was one of the changes that they made. They made a couple of other changes generally in response to the report, but in terms of the wholesale reform of solitary confinement that the report had advocated for, including the final report saying that we should exclude people with serious and persistent mental illness from solitary confinement, that we should limit solitary confinement sentences to a certain number of days. Those big changes were not implemented.
And Joe, could you speak to that, this transitional housing status? Did that help you at all?
Let me give you a visual. So when I punch you, like if I was to punch you in the face, what would you call it?
Sucker punching
An
me.
assault.
Right.
An assault, right? So it's like me punching you in the face, but saying that I'm giving you flowers. Same exact act, it's just worded differently. So same sting, same harsh feeling, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. It's just instead of me saying I'm punching you in the face, or instead of you saying I'm putting you in solitary confinement, I'm saying, nah, I just gave you a bouquet of roses, or no, I'm putting you in transitional confinement. Same practice, different name, same results, which is a complete failure of true rehabilitation. There's really nothing proper about it, but nothing has changed except for the name, and that just allows more time for the ACI to do as they please. They know that in order for any change to occur, we got to continually go through things like this, lawsuits, litigation. And that's why, in my eyes, I don't really believe when you get the opportunity, I don't believe that there should be compromises, in my opinion, because by compromising with places like the DOC, with their history and the way that they operate and what the goal of the DOC is supposed to be, compromises just continue to give them leeway into doing what they want to do. And if not, it gives them enough time legally and administratively to find loopholes around the compromise so that they continue to do injustice within the DOC.
Folks, if you're just joining us, a special presentation of the coalition tonight. Natalia Friedlander is an attorney advocating on behalf of our other guest, Joe Shepard. Joe Shepard was an inmate at the ACI in Cranston, Rhode Island, and experienced 8 months, what's euphemistically called segregation. We call it solitary confinement. There is a lawsuit that has been levied against a variety of individuals personally, a civil lawsuit, attacking, if you will, a system that tortures human beings, decimates the few legal rights that they are accorded, and ironically, and let's get into then now the order of events that took place that led up to this incorporation. In a sense, what the system does is bait you into a response that either portrays you as someone violent, which leads to more segregation, air quotes, solitary confinement, or prompts you to engage in a paper chase, leads you to understand that the paper chase is thoroughly impotent, and then effectively creates a reputation for you as a target. So in 2019, while you were incarcerated in medium security, you attempted to reach out to officials documenting a number of issues that we've talked about, the overall sanitary conditions of the of folks' cells, essentially a vision of what the reality was for someone who lived in the ACI. How was that met, and what recommendations were made by the most senior management for your complaints?
Well, the number one thing, because I feel like it has meaning, but the meaning isn't being utilized for what it's supposed to be intended for. The number one thing that I tried bringing to the light was the grievance process, which is supposed to protect the little rights that we do have as convicts and inmates. And the grievance process within the ACI has a whole, from the men's facility, minimum all the way to high security, intake, and the women's facility. The grievance process is completely comical. It accomplishes nothing. It's basically wasted paper. And that's just another way for them. I'll tell you like this, it gives a CO a post, a position, a reason to get further income. It doesn't do nothing for what it's intended to do. The grievance process is what's supposed to protect us. It's supposed to be a way where we can non-violently basically get what's being done to us approached, and we're trying to bring the negative things to the light. Simple things. It could be something like your belongings got lost in the laundry while the laundry was getting done, and it can range all the way up to an assault or sexual harassment by a CO or nursing staff. So the grievance process is something that is supposed to be utilized for all inmates to use in a nonviolent manner, where you could properly conduct yourself and get the wrongs that have been done to you properly viewed and managed. And that's not the case. I brought up things like that. Another thing is how things like the tax, this is all items in the ACI, like toilet paper, the chemicals that I use to clean the cells, all stuff that the taxpayers pay for. How COs blatantly brag about how since they started working at the ACI, they never pay for paper towel again or toilet paper. How they take, every time they use the gym that was built for them, how they take the white t-shirts that are supposed to be going to the inmates, how they just take them freely and do as they please with whatever's back there. So I targeted that as well. Periodically, every inmate is supposed to be given a certain amount of boxes or briefs, t-shirts, and socks. And that's never been the case, never has been, even though it's in policy. I've stated things like how there's some rule made up to where you can't participate in certain classes, rehabilitative classes, educational classes, unless you have a certain amount of time, like 3 years or under. You can't participate in these rehabilitative classes. And for, let's say, for an example, people who are doing 50 years or people who are doing life, that are trying to better themselves, even though the situation they're in, they can never participate in these educational classes or rehabilitative courses because of a rule that's not even really policy. It's not promulgated. It's just made up by the DOC staff for whatever reason. So, and then things like rules being made up inside of medium 1 medical unit, where a CO can work a post, and depending on how he or she feels, can just type something up and put it on a wall, and that's what everyone's going to go by, and you can get booked by it, even though it's not a bookable offense, even though it's not a policy, even though it was just a rule made up 2 hours ago. My packet is approaching things like that, how taxpayers' dollars are being misused, how there can be better ways to go about making the population manageable, more healthier mentally, physically, in regards to the type of food that we're eating. I targeted the classes, the courses, the way that we're able to obtain them. I targeted the rules that are being made up as the day goes by, and how the grievance process that's supposed to help us with these things is completely misused, disregarded, and viewed by not only the inmates now, but by the staff as just being a joke. People
Can I
kind of
ask a
don't
question?
even.
Sure, absolutely, please.
Yeah. So Joe, I don't know the answer to this one, but the lawsuit that you ended up filing that you told us about that you settled, did you file grievances on the officer's actions
Definitely.
before you filed the federal case? Yeah. And what
Yeah, I
response did you
exhausted
get to those
all
grievances?
interdepartmental remedies.
And
The
what response did
responses
you
were,
get?
they was completely irrelevant to everything that I was mentioning. And like they would just put something on paper that has absolutely nothing to do with anything that I've spoken on at all. The responses were, I don't know verbatim, but I remember them being completely irrelevant. Like if you was to read them after what I had written about, then you would like it would make your jaw drop, because you're just like the disrespect, like the disrespect to you as a human, but the disrespect to your intelligence, the disrespect in general to the nature of the situation and how it's being responded to. Like I'm a human being reaching out to a human being that claims to be an authoritative figure, looking out for the best interests of not only the inmates but the public. How you can be completely disregarded. The grievances were completely irrelevant. I filed them because I knew I had to, but sadly,
Yeah.
by dealing with the grievance process, I knew that there wasn't gonna be an answer on the administrators end.
And that's what I figured, and that's why I asked, because they could have saved themselves, a lot of attorney time and a federal case and a settlement if they had actually investigated and responded to those grievances adequately. And that's one of the things that Joe was complaining about in his packet. That one of the issues he was raising.
And to your
And I
point,
just like to
yeah, go ahead, buddy.
I would just like to also mention on that right there is something that the administrative preys on, that they are hoping, they're gambling dice when they don't respond to your grievances. They're gambling dice that you're one of the high percentage of inmates that have severe mental health issues or learning disabilities, or you're too caught up or stressed out or deterred to go through the whole process of filing a lawsuit. They roll dice on that thought right there. They prey on the weak. They prey on what you're going through, and they make your life a living hell if they even catch wind that that's your goal or plan to
My
go
father,
forward with lawsuit.
my father is just saying, he calls it the course of least resistance. In other words, you establish, if you will, a grievance process, but I'm going to project here for a second. If you participate in that grievance process, then essentially you single yourself out for additional abuse. The grievance process does not create any opportunity, if you will, for whistleblowers. And if someone becomes a quote-unquote whistleblower, again, they're singled out. And this is where we get the crux to the matter. When you attempted to raise the level of the complaint to, if you will, the head of the Department of Corrections, you were sent back, if you will, with marching orders to participate in the very grievance process that you were trying to point out was so grotesquely inadequate. All the while, a properly vetted, a properly run grievance process not only does it have the opportunity for cost savings, but it diminishes frustration, it keeps people accountable, and overall has the opportunity to reduce violence in situations like this, which I would imagine on a daily basis. I think the term is tinderbox. According to your lawsuit, you submitted the paperwork, if you will, to Ms. Coyne-Fague, who then sent you back essentially to square one. Is that a fair way to look at it?
Yes. And I'm pretty sure, I can't say this obviously 100% knowing, but I'm pretty sure that she barely even viewed whatever I sent her. She probably just typed something out that was very general to what she does on a regular basis and just sent it to me without any full inventory of what I've sent her.
And by the way, Attorney Friedlander, Natalia, if you will, it has been alleged in several public forums that the head of the Department of Corrections, particularly during the COVID period, the height of the COVID pandemic, when infections were rife, inmates had not gotten any type of priority because of the close confinement they were living in for the vaccine, that in fact she was largely MIA from the facility. That here's an individual who, if the term I think in business circles is management by walking around, clearly wasn't walking around the very facilities that she was responsible for. Are you aware of this? Is this urban legend, or is this an issue in this lawsuit?
So not specifically in this lawsuit, and I don't want to speculate on her actions during the pandemic. I can say that we did send a joint letter as the Center for Justice with the ACLU raising concerns during the COVID pandemic to Director Coyne-Fague about the fact that the statements that they were making publicly about every prisoner being given a mask, about hand washing, about compliance with safety policies, that we were being told this was not observed on the ground. And we took this step of sending that public letter, which is on the Rhode Island ACLU's website, because there was a disconnect between the public statements about what was happening and what people were seeing inside the facility. But I can't speak to her role and what she knew and whatnot, because I don't know.
And Attorney, why is the possession of documents from an outside organization that exists to work to protect inmate rights, why is that considered mutinous? I haven't, you got to go to the HMS Bounty for me to drop the mutinous card. I mean, again, I'm not trying to be glib here.
You would have to ask them.
Where does mutinous come in? And in terms of the possession of information that would support their legal standing?
That's a question that, Joe, I believe you raised at the disciplinary hearing. Did you get a response?
No response. A lot of the times, these, in general, COs, lieutenants, the ones who are choosing your punishment, how long you're going to be contained in solitary confinement, they barely even know their own policy. They just come up with things at random because it's normal for them to do so at this point. There's no one there to police the police. So they're going to book you for what they want to book you for, and you're going to accept it, and you're going to go to SEG, and you're going to sit down. And if you lose your mind, so be it. And if you try to ask them questions, they're not going to get answered. And if you try to correct them on something that you think you know, then you're going to be further punished. So when it came to mutiny or mutinous, they didn't have no response for anything that I brought up in regards to that in their policy.
And forgive me for dropping what are clearly boomer cultural references, but if there's anyone my age who thinks this sounds a lot like Cool Hand Luke or Papillon, you'll have to forgive me because it sounds exactly like that. Now I'm going to run through a couple of stipulations that are being a part of the lawsuit to just so folks can sort of just drink in the insanity here. A disciplinary hearing was held over his mutinous, if you will, possession of documents that, my God, might have some bearing on his legal status. You were placed in segregation, and jump in and tell me where I'm wrong here, for 2 weeks before you were even given a charge. So in a sense, you were jailed without being told what you were essentially were jailed within jail for. You had a witness at a disciplinary hearing. It was refused, and you were not permitted to see the evidence being used against you because, in your words, it was confidential. You were given 20 days segregation as punishment, but kept in segregation for an additional 2 months, contrary to RIDOC policy. And I'm just reading here, so folks bear with me. The Associate Director of Classification Services overrode that decision and instead ordered Joe transferred to high security, Rhode Island's Supermax prison. Now, understand that, and I want to stress this point because there's a tendency for the public, and I was guilty of this too, if you will, to believe that solitary confinement / segregation is accorded only to the most violent criminals in our system. And to that, it's clear, after my experience both in studying this case and conversations with folks, that is utter balderdash. That, in fact, it appears to me that this Kafkaesque nightmare that people engage in when they enter correctional facilities in Rhode Island has no bounds, no laws, no due process, no regulations. It's just what it comes down to is, if, excuse my language, if you piss somebody off or if you're seen as disruptive, not physically, but if you will, within the confines of their classification system, you are on a short path to hell. All right? 2 more classification hearings, and each time the classification board voted to send him back to medium security, but an associate director overrode the decisions in order to keep him in high security. Wow. Correctional officers, told you, Mr. Shepard, that your disciplinary charge was pretextual and that he was actually being punished because the content of his packets had aroused the ire of prison officials and COs. I got to ask you, people actually within the system told you that you'd essentially pissed somebody off or embarrassed somebody, and that's why you were being put up for these extra legal proceedings? Is that true?
It's 100% correct. While I was in segregation, it was before I even before I even knew what I was being booked for. There was COs that have to go around every couple hours, go by the doors, and they stopped at my door, and he said, quote, he said, "You're fucked." He said, "You pissed them off, and they're gonna get you out of here." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "The packet, whoever it got to, was posted online, and they've seen it, and you're fucked." I said, "All right," and that was that. I was made aware that that's the real reason why I'm being held, while I'm being targeted, per se.
And that other prisoners who were in possession, and I'm using the words right from the complaint, similar documents, if you will, were not treated as heinously, as grievously as you were. Is that true as well?
Not similar, the exact same documents. Not similar, the exact same documents. They were given
Pat,
their...
Yeah, go ahead. So I don't necessarily want to go into what the other people did, but I do want to point out something that Pat's... Yeah, I do want to point out something that Pat said, which is, there's this idea that it's only for the most dangerous, for the most violent people, biggest disciplinary problems. Before this booking, you had been booking free for about 4 years, right? With no disciplinary bookings?
Yeah, so it was the last time I was booked before this incident in 2019 was in 2014.
Wow.
And how common would you say that is, to go 5 years without a single infraction? in the prison context.
That's I'm a rare breed.
You, in a
Yeah.
sense, have
And
become
the
a
second
model
thing I
prisoner.
wanted to, yeah, because he was filing grievances and he was filing lawsuits to resolve these issues, because that's what he had been doing, is he had
Right.
been making complaints through the proper process. And I did want to point out one thing on the mutinous acts. Mutinous acts, right? It sounds terrifying. It's a sanction that carries 1 to 30 days in disciplinary confinement, and he got 20. So this offense that they said was justified, him spending almost 8 months in segregation, the disciplinary board had the opportunity to give him up to 30 days. They gave him 20. And then everything else that happened after, those decisions that were made were not by the discipline board. They were by, we allege, were taken by the defendants in this litigation.
Which is why I use the term Kafkaesque, because unseen people, unseen hands making decisions on someone's life without any level of due process, any structure to the proceedings or to the regulations or how they should conduct themselves, engaging in what some people call jailhouse lawyering, other people just realize is what is actually, and again, attempt to maintain the sanctity of one's civil rights. How did this ended up? Spiraling to 8 months. And Natalia, I got to ask you, how common is this? And are there people actually in there for longer?
No, there are people in Supermax for years, and it's fairly common for a disciplinary sanction where you're given a definite term of days in solitary confinement to come with a downgrade, which means that your time in solitary is extended by being placed in the Supermax prison after your disciplinary time finishes. And so you're booked for something that carries like a maximum of 30 days, right? Or a maximum of 21 days. And then the time you spend is extended beyond what the policy says you should get for that infraction.
Simply, and I'm not trying to minimize this, but simply at the whim of powerful individuals within the system. Is that a fair statement?
Well, the classification decisions are made by a board. And in this case, the classification board decided to keep Joe in medium security, and that decision was overruled. So what we're alleging in the complaint is that the decision was ultimately made by one of the defendants in the lawsuit after a classification board voted to keep him in medium.
Right. Natalia, as we start to come to the close of tonight's conversation, this won't be the last one. What can you sort of summarize? I mean, I'm intimate with this just because I've studied the issues, but for folks who are listening and don't really understand the impact, because we in every movie we see, and again, I'm not trying to infuse this with popular culture, but we have to understand that popular culture impacts people's analysis of political events. So we see people in the war movies there, or in Papillon or whatever, going in the hole, and they go in the hole and they appear magically, in the next scene in the movie, noticeably thinner, but sweaty. They're always sweaty. And then they're ready to go back to it. I'm not trying to trivialize it all, but again, popular culture has this vision of what solitary confinement is. What, from your perspective, and from the facts as you've seen them, what impact does solitary confinement have in the big picture on all of the individuals incarcerated and subjected to this cruel and unusual punishment?
There's a lot of evidence that solitary confinement makes a lot of healthy people sick and a lot of sick people even sicker. That the number of people in solitary confinement with serious and persistent mental illness is disproportionately higher than in general populations of departments of corrections around the country. That, like I mentioned, it makes prisons less safe. It increases violent incidents. Use of solitary confinement increases assaults on other prisoners and on staff. It has physical effects. It has psychological effects. And these are things that we've known for hundreds of years. We don't need doctors coming around and doing these studies in departments of corrections, which they do. But we have known this since Charles Dickens' time, that if you put someone in a sensory deprivation box, not in the scientific way, but in a box where you have limited access to the outside world, where you have limited things to stimulate you psychologically, that is going to be harmful to you. It's common sense, and there's a lot of research to back it up as well.
Do you think the average Rhode Islander is fully cognizant or even fundamentally aware of what's going on just a couple of miles from a bougie shopping center? And the ordinary lives of
shopping centers.
Two bougie shopping centers. While folks are dining at the Chapel restaurant, which is a fine place, by the way, they're no connected to this, but it's a beautiful spot actually. And just literally, you could say a walking distance away, there are people incarcerated under these conditions. Do you think the average Rhode Islander is really aware of this?
I would like to think that if more people were aware of what was happening in the Department of Corrections, that there would be more of an impetus to change things.
And before I give Joe an opportunity to kind of just say something to people who are listening tonight, and actually we're going to be this hour or so that you've been kind enough to spend with us, Joe and Natalia, will be circulated aggressively throughout Rhode Island. What are the processes? What happens next? When will Joe get a chance to have his day in court and seek justice? What happens now?
So now the Department of Corrections has time to respond, and they could respond by trying to dismiss the complaint, in which case we will move to keep the complaint alive. They could respond by answering, in which case we would start moving into discovery. And generally, federal litigation takes a while. So unless the complaint is dismissed offhand, which I hope it's not, it's going to be a little while before Joe has, so to speak, his day in court. And federal litigation moves very slowly, and it's a very inefficient way of resolving issues.
And as we like to say here on the Coalition Radio Network, in the halls of justice, justice is often found, in fact, in the halls. And again, before I go to Joe, because I want to make sure that Joe has the final word here tonight, tell us about the Center for Justice, what you folks do, and how folks can support them both philosophically and financially. We call this segment of the show with a smile, shameless self-promotion. So if you could, on behalf of your organization and yourself, engage in some shameless self-promotion.
I appreciate that. Thanks. We are a nonprofit public interest law center that was founded in 2014, I believe. And when I started off at the center, had 3 full-time attorneys. We've been able to expand, which we're extremely grateful for. Primarily, the center deals with tenant rights, conditions, housing conditions, evictions. As you can imagine, there have been a lot of people who've been facing eviction and homelessness. So we've been extremely busy over the past year and a half trying to keep people housed. Mm-hmm. There's also the Criminal Justice Project that this was filed under. And until fairly recently, that was just myself. We just brought on 2 fellows who are going to be working with the Criminal Justice Project, which we're very excited about.
Excellent.
And we are online at centerforjustice.org. FOR is spelled out. And from our website, you could find our various other social media, which is not particularly active. But our contact information is also there on the website.
Excellent. I hesitate to think as bad as things are now at certain levels, what this state would be like without a handful of organizations, yours amongst them, in terms of trying to maintain some level of integrity in the criminal justice system. I can't even imagine what this place would be like. I want to point out the fact that the ACLU is obviously involved in this as well, as they often are, and are an amazing organization. People should contribute to your organization. They also should join the ACLU. And that renders me very unpopular amongst some of my right of center friends. But I would argue that very often the folks who everybody's mad at are usually doing the right thing. And my hat's off to Stephen Brown and his continued support of work supporting criminal justice rights. Joe, you're the most important person in this conversation, and I'm grateful that you took the time to join us tonight. In closing, what would you like to say to people so that they understand or can begin to try and understand why this is so important?
It's important to me because I'm able to see the bigger picture now of why things are the way they are in certain communities, like where I'm from, Minton Projects.
Mm-hmm.
And you see the multiple factors that are at play when it comes to the reasons why these neighborhoods haven't changed too much in the last 20 or 30 years in regards to crime, drug addiction, violence, and poverty. And the ACI, which is supposed to be a rehabilitative step in one's journey to becoming a productive citizen, actually does the complete opposite, but milks on a way to further breaking the human being down. It milks every financial dollar that it can get from the state of Rhode Island and the federal government. And that is one of the reasons why things don't typically change in the Department of Corrections, because of that phrase, where it's basically not in my backyard.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people outside of Providence don't experience the day-to-day life of a convict or inmate or someone that's in poverty. They don't experience that on a daily basis, and they usually don't have people in their households that have experienced it firsthand. So I do this because not only for me, but for everyone, in hopes that things can change, obviously for the better, to give people the opportunity to get true and real rehabilitation. My view of prisons and the history of prisons is a car that's made to look pretty but doesn't run. So my goal is, out of all of this, to give a voice to people that are going through it right now, that have been through it, and that are going to continue to go through it. So I hope to change that, give people hope, inspiration, a voice, the knowledge, and the ability to do something about it, not only for themselves, but for others as well.
Well, Joe Shepard, Natalia Friedlander, thank you so much for spending the evening with us. This is obviously intensely personal for you, Mr. Shepard, and I appreciate and I'm grateful for your courage in bringing this issue forward. And again, this wasn't the first conversation you and I have had, and it won't be the last. So to both of you, God bless, and let's keep the conversation going as this litigation takes its probably tortured path through the somewhat interestingly termed Rhode Island criminal justice system. Folks, we are the Coalition. As always, we are loud and proud. We are outrage porn free, and as always, our civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network right here from our home in Providence, Rhode Island. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. And we ask, please listen to this once or twice. It'll change your perspective on virtually everything once you follow this to its logical conclusion. And that's the point. As a man once said, the purpose of this network is to disrupt people, to rip them, if you will, from the suburbs of their minds. Does that sound aggressive? Yep. That's what we do here. Have a great night, and we'll see all of you soon. Thank you.